Okay. So I don't understand the bricks, but then unfortunately Chase says he doesn't either. So
I can speak a little bit to the bricks. I
okay.
think a bit, right? But from what I understood, they're talking about the symbolic order and meaning generation from the symbolic order, and each brick is more or less like a symbol. And hitherto, people have tried to, so to speak, like build the Great Wall of China, right, to unlock the secrets of the universe through the symbolic order in a very linear and organized way. And they're kind of pointing out that's not how symbols really work. Lacan has kind of made this discovery of the unconscious is like a language, and there's resonances and consonances in all sorts of directions. And the schizoid takes that Great Wall of China brick by brick and just disperses it in all of the directions, as we should do, something we should do with symbols.
So maybe I'm just making too much of something, that maybe they're just being silly, but I mean, that kind of makes sense in terms of what they're doing there. So I'm going to just read a little bit from the very bottom of page 39, like literally the last sentence. Schizzes have to do with heterogeneous chains, and as their basic units use detachable segments or mobile stocks resembling building blocks or flying bricks. Like, I don't know why flying bricks. We must conceive of each brick as having been launched from a distance and as being composed of heterogeneous elements. I mean, does that just mean that these structures are assembled from pieces that have really no relation to each other? Is that what the flying brick thing is? And then in the next sentence, he says, we must, or the next part, containing within it not only an inscription with signs from different alphabets, but various figures, plus one or several straws and perhaps a corpse. And I was like, what?
Yeah, so I think what they're doing there is emphasizing and exaggerating to a kind of comical effect how there's no signifying, or maybe I'm using the wrong term here, but signifying relationship. It's not a relationship of a kind of linear meaning in the way we would think of how your normal conscious common sense kind of logical connections are made, where one thing has to relate to another in some kind of a distinct way. Instead, they're emphasizing that these are truly heterogeneous. They're different things, yet they're connected through this disjunctive synthesis that connects things that are different. So I think that's mainly what they're emphasizing there. And the brick thing, so I read that part.
I think on the bricks, I think the blocks and the bricks are both flying. Looking at the French, I don't think that it's really saying blocks or building blocks or flying bricks. I think it's flying building blocks or flying bricks, because the French is a little of course the adjective comes afterwards, right? So it's pardon my horrible French, but comme des blocs ou des briques volantes. So they're both flying, I think.
Also, the next sentence or whatever mentions the signifying chain, I think, right? The Lacan signifying chain. And I'm understanding this to say, like, following what you are saying, Chase, is that it's not a chain, right? Like, these things exist. It's not like, it's only like, it's this sort of like desire to put it into a chain when it's not necessarily there, like trying to make it fit.
So it is a chain, where they do call it a signifying chain and cite Lacan on that. And also that it's a chain of desire. I think the thing is, okay, so probably I think my terminology is signifying is probably, I think they are saying that it is a signifying chain in the sense that it uses signs although the signs don't have relations of sign to or signifier to signified, that kind of Saussurean semiotics, where there's a this overcoding signifier with a capital S, the despotic signifier, that's the one meaning you've got. This is Dr. Phil explaining to the schizo, what is this? Tell me what this means. Your imaginary friend, are they real? Who are they? Tell me. What is he looking for? He's looking for the signifier with the capital S. So I think they're stressing that it's not that kind of relation of a kind of, I think, a discursive kind of relation, but there are signs that relate to other signs, but they always have some kind of remainder of this kind of code that can never actually be totally reduced to one signifier or one set fixed meaning. What was the other? There was something else. Oh, the brick thing. Okay, so I think they say that they resemble bricks or blocks. So I think what they're getting at there is they're seeing this as a kind of basic unit. They go through this kind of there's first the structure. I say structure, they don't want to say structure, but whatever, I'm saying structure. So it's all set up on these three syntheses again, where this time they're talking about machines. What are machines? Machines are break flows. So there's always some kind of a break or a cut into a flow. And then they have three different types that correspond with these three syntheses. But the thing is, and then they go through these and, what is the basic unit of specifically this second synthesis of the recording? That's going to be this code, which operates according to these bricks of segments of signs. So I think the brick is just kind of showing, basic unit that you can use to build other larger things, in these series. So I'm not sure it really has much more meaning than that, just to kind of show that it's something you can use to build something, or you can throw it. So yeah, the flying, I think that has to do with the fact that these are mobile units. So all of these break flows, they mobilize some kind of energy. The first synthesis, the connective synthesis, that's going to mobilize libido. The second synthesis is going to mobilize the Newman, which I don't want to get into exactly what that is. Okay, I think I have somewhat of an idea, but yeah. And then the third has to do with, what is the third one? Oh,
Voluptas or something.
yeah, so that's pleasure, Latin, yeah. Which that's where the subject is formed and all of that. But yeah, I think that would be my kind of basic way of seeing it. I wouldn't get too caught up in specifically in the language of bricks or blocks, or why they're using, these ridiculous combinations. I think they're just stressing that they don't have a kind of straightforward relation the way that we would think of, the way you would normally think of logical associative thinking. They're thinking, a good example of what they're trying to present is more of a kind of dream logic. The way that associations kind of happen, you know, relations happen in your dreams, but at the same time, they don't have some kind of single fixed meaning between each other. They don't really necessarily have to resemble anything. It just kind of works in a way that's just kind of a passive synthesis of various connections that are not really, they don't have to be all the same thing or connected in the same line of meaning or a logic of kind of progressive evolution, or, you know, all kind of have one kind of prior meaning or identity that then just kind of unfolds in this process of logical unfoldment. That's, I think, what they're stressing, that this is not, that this is the language of the unconscious, which is very different from how we normally use language to a certain extent. They're trying to stress that difference. So that's where I describe it as.
Is this all a description of what's going on in the second synthesis, the disjunctive synthesis, the stuff that's happening on the body, you know, these lines of disjunctive relations on the body without organs, or not?
So anything to do with disjunctions, and putting these and recording, that has to do with the second synthesis, which that's going to, okay, so the first synthesis is going to be that connective synthesis. So this is, you know, the baby's mouth, mother's breast, nipple, whatever. That's going to be that connective synthesis. The baby's mouth is cutting into the flow of milk, and then that milk itself becomes a flow that gets cut into, you know, the digestive system. It gets the blood, or I don't know anything about anatomy or whatever, but yeah, eventually then you get okay, I think one of their examples that they continuously use, and I think is actually really helpful, is the anus. I think that's a good example of a flow. You got a flow going on there, but you also have breaks and the necessity of those breaks. So that's all connected, but in ways that are not totally reducing them all to just one thing. They're connected, but through these kind of distinctions like that. So that's the first synthesis. And then the second synthesis is a kind of way of, will detach elements from those first in a kind of code that's like a recording or something that's transmissible and communicable. So I think a good example of that would be DNA, genetic code. The way that, you know, you've got all those processes of the connective synthesis, these desiring machines, where you've got, okay, yeah, baby's mouth, these drives, nipple, there's a lot of DNA and kind of genetics going on there, but yet it's not reducible to that. They're distinct at the same time. They're kind of these different levels that are constantly communicating with each other and informing each other because they presuppose each other in a kind of reciprocal way.
What I was wondering, you know, that stuff we were just talking about with the bricks and all that comes, you know, on page 38, he says, you know, the first full paragraph, in the second place, each machine has a sort of code built into it, stored up inside. And then he starts talking about later in the paragraph, the data, the bits of information recorded and their transmission form a grid of disjunctions and so on. So what, I guess my question was the stuff that were in these 2 pages where he's talking about these chains of signs and so on, he's he's talking about the disjunctive synthesis there, isn't he? In these 2 pages? I mean, that's what it looks like.
Yeah, I think so. So at the
And so
beginning
then
of this section, they're talking about the first synthesis, the connective. And then I think around, well, I guess it's pretty, what, the second page here? Or I guess it's actually, yeah, I think it's around 38. That's when they start talking about the second synthesis, I believe.
So
Yeah,
something
like-
I didn't realize that you just said, because I was wondering, how do you get, like you're saying in the let's see, in the connective synthesis, you get these chains of organs, or I'm sorry, these chains of machines that are interrupting and passing these flows, and then somehow that gets inscribed, I guess, on the body without organs. But what from what you were saying is what gets inscribed, these so-called codes. Because again, near the top of 38, he says, in the second place, every machine has a sort of code built into it, stored up inside. And so I was trying to figure out what is the information that goes from the connections of the desiring machines and the connective synthesis. What is it that gets inscribed on the body without organs that gets connected through the disjunctive synthesis? And is it these codes that he's talking about? Is that what ends up being the signs that are disjunctively synthesized?
Yeah, I think
I-
so.
I'm wondering like a concrete example to plug the logic into, and I'm wondering, and if somebody else can make the logic make sense, but I'm thinking of like the mouth and the anus. Would it apply here to think of like some sort of code of how the mouth like is like, oh, I want to be an anus, and I don't know. Does that make sense to anyone else?
Well, it kind of, and I asked this in the chat, it's very similar to the solar anus when it came to Bataille for me as well. Like, did Deleuze have any interaction with Bataille, or did Bataille have any interaction with Deleuze? Because they seems like the parallels between the synthesis and the code, and particularly use of waste and corresponding with the anus, is prevalent in the accursed share and the solar anus and in this reading. So that's what I was curious about.
I think the evidence is there, Joseph. I've been thinking, again, the pointing to desire not to be understood as a lack, right, but as something positive in its own right, kind of points to Bataille's reversal of economy, right? It's not about limited resources, but so much like surplus energy, and yeah, the thought occurred to me, I think last week or this week, that what we're reading here is something like what Bataille did with his theory of general economy. It seems like Deleuze and Guattari are doing like a theory of general libido.
I like that. That's a good statement.
I'll sit to it.
So so Joey mentioned something about what a code might be. Apparently it's, the codes from these machines are what get inscribed on the body without organs, and then those get connected to this disjunctive synthesis. But what are these codes? I don't really have a sense for what that means. Or is that something he's going to tell us later?
I'm not sure. I guess when I read code, I just think of like a function or like a utility. I think that, and again, I was trying to plug it into like the anus mouth example. I was thinking like, a connection is made, like the anus functions a certain way, and the body without organs can kind of disconnect this functioning of the anus and then plug it into another machine and like make something else function like an anus. That's the kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's kind of how I read it as well, as a function. Like the code is the way that the machine operates, and the codes kind of converge. So like how individuals or humans are made up of machines, and these machines converge to make a bigger machine, I guess, is kind of how I read it, but I'm not sure.
I'm just throwing shit at the wall here, but I think on a certain level, I took the codes to be like the symbolic logic of consumerist society, producing desire, telling, basically directing consumers on where to buy their, how to consume, right?
Well, they,
Well,
Oh, go ahead.
earlier
no,
he
I'm
mentioned
sorry.
that there's the body without organs appears in like in different manifestations or something. And so I think there's a body without organs that's associated with, I guess, a human body, but then there's also the body without organs associated with capitalism, and a body without organs associated with what, tyranny or something. And so, I assume that these different terms have similar relationships in those different contexts. So what you were talking about sounds like it would fit within the capitalist thing, but then apparently he thinks that one also informs the human. So I'm sorry, I don't know how that fits together.
I am wondering if it is kind of like more towards what Joey was saying, because on 38, and this is what I brought up in the chat before I forget, where he talks about the law of the production of production. He says, in a word, every machine function is a break in the flow in relation to the machine to which it is connected, but at the same time is also a flow itself, or the production of a flow in relation to the machine connected to it. This is the law of production. And then further on page 38, when he actually mentions them, he says, in the second place, every machine is a sort of code built into it, stored up inside it. This code is inseparable not only from the way in which it is recorded and transmitted to each of the different regions of the body, but also from the way in which the relations of each of the regions with all others are recorded. So I'm wondering if the code is kind of related to the law of production that Joey's like, what I understood Joey is saying, and Eric, and so it's like each little section of the desire-based machines in their flux in relation to each other have this built-in code that's just part of the functionality that we won't be able to like narrow down or actually have any type of axiomatic rule to it. It's more in the flux and the behavior and the function.
But yeah, and I just want to first off, hope it sound okay. I guess I'm not super confident in a reading of the material yet, but I have been learning a lot about signifying chains recently. I recently picked up this book called Return to Freud, Lacan's Dislocation of Psychoanalysis, which is pretty cool. Totally irrelevant here, though. I just wanted to show it off. And I've, through that and other sources, I've just I've been thinking about this because Lacan definitely talks about codes. He's definitely talking about codes and even makes mention of in one of the seminars, meaning his seminars, of the attachment and detachment or disattachment between different signifying chains in sharing of code, which reminded me very much of this reference to surplus value that Deleuze employs. But to talk about what does a code do? What is a code? First, I just want to, we say machines have codes, but what are machines? Okay, what are machines really? And I think that what it would be, and maybe this is just projecting onto Deleuze. This is not what Deleuze intended for me to say. I would be disgusted by me saying this, but it just makes sense to me that a machine is a signifier. The word machine, a machine, it is a signifier. It's not the signified necessarily. And even if it is the signified, it has to pass through it being a signifier of a signified. And the only way that I can relate to it as being a true signified thing is if I dissimulate its status as a signifier and fetishize it And I don't think Deleuze wants to do that because Deleuze is really smart. And he had Guattari next to him, like worm tongue, whispering Lacanian secrets into his ear. And he knew not to do that. He knew very well not to do that. I can't just call the machine, yes, a system of interruption and breaks. And what is a system of interruptions and breaks, but a metonymic chain of signifiers in the case of something like discourse or something, right? A discourse being a multi-dimensional even Lacan, even in old fuddy-duddy Lacan, discourse, standard verbal even discourse, is a multi-dimensional metonymic chain of differential articulation boundaried by cuts, gaps, and expletives, like the phrase like me all the time when I'm kind of bordering and boundarying my thought and my ideas with prefaces like I am just an idiot though, or something like that. And then somebody might respond, really? But my point is, no, well, yeah, do they say that it's not a metonymic chain explicitly? I know that they call it a chain, but my point is, that's Lacan talking. What I'm trying to say about codes is that these structures of signifiers, and perhaps, yes, I don't know, did Deleuze and Guattari explicitly said this is not a metonymic chain, and don't say it is one. If they did, then I woefully missed it on at the last stop of the train. But what I think is that when we talk about code, there's this, I think it was Saussure who brought up this illustration of the unconscious chess player, or well, of language being operated sort of like a chess player. And then this guy named Samuel Weber came in later and said, okay, well, if we're going to talk about language like that, maybe not in Saussure's terms where he privileged the signified and tried to unify language as this comprehensive science of semiotics or whatever. Samuel Weber or whatever says, well, it's more like an unconscious chess player. And even for an unconscious chess player, this game of language, it follows certain codes, and those codes involve the shape of the board, the number of squares, the strategic the strategic considerations that a player might need to consider or implement in their enacting of a decision, kind of prophecying or predating the Wittgensteinian game theory or language game thing. The point is, this structure of a game-like reference that Saussure deploys, I think, points to at least something that we can say, like to go back to the anus and the mouth. Lacan, well, Freud really talks about the anus and the mouth as being two of the primary localities in the empirical bodily ego narcissistic ideal self body of the child, as one of as a few of the initial sites or earliest sites of castration. I'm suckling at a breast and then I am pulled away and I have a finger wagging my face and saying no more. And I am a whole thing. I'm a whole complete thing while divorced from my motor capacities or from my sense of being a subject, which I will have been. But I defecate, I lose feces. And the process involved in both of these experiences, losing a nipple and defecating, they're strange, they're productive of something external to me, being a denial that I have to reckon with, or feces that I now have to reckon with, because now I'm wallowing in my shit and being told no, and I'm just a mess. I'm saying these, the castration, that's what I'm saying. Even though castration is a no-no and castration, whatever, we might have mixed feelings about that. I'm just saying, whether you believe that those are sites of castration or not, whether you believe that or not, that I think is an example of the significant elements of a concrete site that can be pointed to through the material vehicle of signs and signifiers, right? The letter, the building blocks, hurling through the air, which is a big thing for Lacan, is the instance of a letter. Those sites can be seen to operate, or at least not, maybe not operate, but take part in the multi-dimensional metonymic, or well, I guess not here, metonymic, not on the good side. It's not metonymic here, but for other people, for certain other, people, they believe that it's metonymic. Sure, erogenous zones would be an example. Yeah, like would be a way to put it. Yes, it's my mouth or my penis or my ass or something like that. There's at least what we can point to. Maybe they're not the same and maybe they don't operate the same, but there is a code, even in the experience of the single individual, that they can be identified to, relate to. They have this sort of relation, even though they're so wildly disparate. And I think that is what I think of when I think, but I don't think it's literally like, because you touch my penis and I get excited, or you touch my mouth and I get excited, or you touch my ass and I get excited. And now I notice that all three of those things get me all up and at them. And now I see this connecting code of these operative parts of my body as erogenous. I think that it's not just that, because that again is just kind of deferring to this imaginative plane of empirical reality or whatever, the inhuman view that Deleuze has referenced, of like, reality or whatever, not the real, but reality. And I'm saying that it makes more sense to me to see those codes as being codes of signification, rather than, codes of observable patterning or whatever you might prefer there. But that's what I think when I think of these codes, and what these codes are that machines are loaded up with, and why they're loaded up with these codes.
Let me read the book. This is the paragraph on page 38, where at the beginning, it's the beginning of that paragraph where he says every machine has a sort of code built into it. But then like 2/3 of the way down, he says, how very strange this domain seems simply because of its multiplicity. A multiplicity so complex that we can scarcely speak of one chain or even one code of desire. The chains are called signifying chains because they are made up of signs, but these signs are not themselves signifying. The code resembles not so much a language as a jargon, an open-ended polyvocal formation. The nature of signs within it is insignificant, as these signs have little or nothing to do with what supports them. Or rather, isn't the support completely immaterial to these signs? The support is the body without organs. These indifferent signs follow no plan. They function at all levels and enter into every sort of connection. Each one speaks its own language and establishes syntheses with others that are quite direct along transverse vectors, whereas the vectors between the basic elements that constitute them are quite indirect. So, I mean, that at least, I don't really understand Lacan at all, or the whole metonymic thing, but that sounds not like what you're describing.
Well, I want to say yes, but just to everything that you just read, I mean, I agree, it's not Lacan. they're certainly not. For better or for worse, it's certainly not. But I'm saying that in this depiction of these chains, why say it's a code? That's my question. That's my basic question. Why say it's a code? Why not say that it does whatever it wants, really? And there's no real way to pin down what it does or what's in it or whatever. It's just a bunch of spaghetti, It's basically or in fact, and at a certain point, bring that to its conclusion, say, and why isn't this whole book a single sentence that goes, reality is but a wild swirling dance of phenomena that we cannot comprehend. And we are merely observers in the dance of spectral cosmic phenomena as they flow past us. And we are, unable to grasp it. And all Lacan did was try to grasp it, and what a fool he was. My point is, there is a code. There is a place for the reference to a code. And while, yes, in fact, my mouth can do plenty of things. I can eat things, I can spit out things, I can throw up my vomit and go back to it. Yeah, sure. And why again do they use the term sign when the signs do not signify necessarily?
And I'm supporting your question about why do they call it a code? Why do they call these things signs?
Well, I don't know. Well, I think
do the codes?
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, is he using the word code? Are they using the word code? Because Qatari, I think, is a really important part of this, at least this part that we are reading right now. Are they using the word code intentionally to bring together another idea. In one place they refer to the schizos scrambling the codes, which seems to be an explicit reference to a particular understanding of codes, right? Where you scramble a code to make it unintelligible. A code like a cryptographic code potentially. And in other places they refer to codes. There was a reference, I can't find it at the moment. I could have sworn I saw a reference earlier on in the readings to being put into the mouth of it. And it's there's a classical reference there to machines and automata having codes put into their mouths. And I wonder if those are all intentionally bringing together these different ideas. Those are the instructions or the raison d'etre for the machine, right? For the automata, I should say, not to confuse it with the machines he's talking about here. But I wonder if that's a really intentional thing that he's doing. I think Chase had mentioned before that Deleuze in particular had a strong classical training, right? So is that am I off track there with those ideas?
Yeah, I think that sounds right. Yeah, I think okay, so they're talking about some codes, they're talking about sign. This is the second disjunctive synthesis. They're talking about codes, they're talking about signs, but they are not signifiers. So what exactly does that mean? So I think the best thing we can do here is, at least that I can think of, is try to think of some examples, which are probably not going to be totally exact, but oh, so the Levi-Strauss floating signifier, that's referenced in Deleuze talks about that in the logic of sense, amongst many other things. But anyway, so one good example that is mentioned is the orchid and the wasp. So this is stressed more in 1,000 Plateaus, but mentioned here. So actually this comes from Proust and Search for Lost Time, or whatever it is in French, which is okay. Yeah, so Deleuze happens to love this Guattari too, love this book, Proust, In Search of Lost Time. I think it's actually the longest book in existence, or something. I've heard that before. I don't know if that's true or not, but what a great thing to just constantly reference. It's only the longest book ever. Yeah, I've got volume 1, and I think it's like 900 pages. There's 6 volumes or something. But anyways, okay, the orchid and the wasp. What's going on here? Okay, so there's a type of orchid that, well, okay, from one perspective, it mimics a certain aspect or a fragment, a code, if you will, of the wasp, in order to get the wasp to think that it's a female wasp, so that male wasp will go and attempt to procreate with what they believe is the female wasp, which is really the orchid, and the orchid uses that to pollinate itself. So it has this kind of extended reproductive system that includes these wasps. And so I think you see there, okay, there's obviously desiring machines, you got partial objects going on, and you've got these connections, the wasp and the orchid. So, but where does the code fit in? I think the code is kind of operating on multiple levels. I think you can see it even on a genetic level, which I think is really helpful in terms of if you take DNA or genetics to be more or less a literal code, literal genetic code. I think that helps to think of these things and to take them for their word that there is something literal going on with almost everything they're going to talk about. So they use examples, they use metaphors, but their theory, I guess, is always going to be, they're always going to try to get away from metaphors. So I think to try to think of it literally is really the challenge that they give you. So I think it helps to think of just a genetic code. That is the code they're talking about. So, okay, a genetic code, I almost know nothing about genetics, so do not quote me on this, but okay, a genetic code is like a language, but it's not really a language. It's not signifying in the sense that I can look at it like a book and read it and it'll make sense to my conscious mind. There would have to be a lot of translation processes going on in order to make any sense of that. And even that would be probably very reductive to try to say that, oh, this code, these amino acids mean this. I think that would, that's not really how it works. But the fact is that these codes can be detached and those work to communicate how these connective machines operate, how they're distributed, how to do these connections. So this is going to be kind of, we've got these instincts, we've got drives, but ultimately what's going to be kind of coordinating these things is there's this series of codes, and it's operating on all these different levels that are always interacting and intersecting, and that point or the surface in which everything is kind of interacting and comes together while being at the same time different, of all these different series and different levels of things, that's going to be that disjunctive synthesis on the surface of the body thought organs. Although that's kind of, so I think they'll explain more why they're using these terms later. Although I think it might be helpful to know, so in Logic of Sense, Deleuze's book, he talks about the surface a lot, and the surface is a kind of metaphysical surface where this disjunctive synthesis happens, but more importantly, this is the surface where sense is generated, meaning. So a lot of these disconnections or more disjunctions, or what's the term they're constantly, detachments, things, yeah, those are going to be what kind of collects and intersects on the surface, this recording surface, and then this disjunctive synthesis is going to put them into relation with each other without totalizing them under some kind of a rule of identity or a signifier of one meaning. So the idea is that this is something that relates differences without erasing their difference. So it has a kind of affirmative sort of action with their difference. And that's going to be, so that's a constant throughout Deleuze. He's constantly stressing, he loves the inclusive disjunction as a synthesis too. And somewhat, okay, I'm not going to get into it, but a lot of times he's talking about this disjunctive synthesis. He's playing off of what Kant talks about. So in the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant has an idea of an idea, the capital I, or I think it's a capital I. Well, I don't know, it's German, everything's capitalized, it's a noun. But so his notion of ideas, so there's ideas operate as something that can't be kind of shown to have some kind of empirical appearance of themselves, in the way that concepts of the understanding, those always have to connect with some kind of empirical appearance. Otherwise it's, it's nonsense, but these ideas, these operate in ways that kind of coordinate things for reason. And Kant says that the disjunctive syllogism is one of these things, but he stresses that it's exclusive, and that this operates to for things to have some kind of a coherent identity with only certain predicates under them. So, and this is what gives a kind of order to, we've got these three big ideas, capital I, God, which is the disjunctive syllogism, the world, which I think that's the hypothetical syllogism, and then the self. So these three kind of coordinating ideas, those going to use kind of this framework, but he's constantly going to be going for the exact opposite. He doesn't want to use the language of opposition, but so instead of the self, there's this kind of a dissolution of the self. That's going to be the kind of coordinating idea. And instead of the world, there's going to be a chaosmos, from Joyce, fitting its wake, which is going to be not the order of the world in this exclusive sense, but instead a kind of order of chaos of disjunctions, all affirmed. So this disjunctive synthesis aspect. And then instead of God, there's going to be, well, the death of God. And okay, this is from more obscure references. Pierre Klosowski, who wrote this really famous, oh, I say really famous, like in my head, it's famous. Nietzsche and the Vicious Circle, where a lot of these ideas about Nietzsche and the eternal return and the idea of the subject and intensities, all this, it's was kind of worked out. Deleuze with Klosowski. So that idea, he also has a book called the Le Baphomet, which, if you're not familiar, actually I have a shirt of Baphomet. I can show it. But this is the idea of, so it's usually seen as a kind of demon thing. I'll show a picture of it, but that's stressed. Instead of God, you get the order of the Antichrist and Baphomet is the master of disjunctions and modifications instead of exclusive limitations, and as this kind of regulative principle. Okay, I've gone off like on a huge tangent. I feel like it started when I was saying I was not going to go into the Kant thing, and then I totally went into that. Oh God. Okay, yeah, disjunctive synthesis, recording stuff. I don't know, something like that. There you go, Baphomet. Which I could tell you about that, but I'll spare y'all.
Goodness, Nevitt did a screen share on a recorded Zoom. You are brave, sir. I don't think I would be able to do that.
So do the codes, I'm sorry, I haven't heard, this stuff makes my brain, it kind of scrambles my brain. So do the codes in some way define the way that the conjunctive synthesis works as well? So, I mean, in a sense, I get, that you get these organs, or sorry, these machines that hook up in these flows and break the flows and, shoot out flows in the conjunctive synthesis, and those form structures that are sort of intelligible, like the baby, the digestive tract and the baby suckling and all that kind of stuff. Are those conjunctions also regulated by the codes as well? Yes, you're nodding your head, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
But then when they get transcribed into the body without organs, you get just the codes without, I mean, I guess that's one question. What is it that, so in the impression I get is the codes define, and I'm, maybe like I said, the genetic thing is maybe a good way to think about it, but these codes end up getting inscribed in the body without organs, and then they can be reconnected in a vast, indefinite variety of ways, right? Through this disjunctive synthesis, where I get the impression in the conjunctive synthesis, there's much more limited ways that they can be connected into these systems of machines. Is that correct?
Yeah, generally, I would say that's true.
So what is it that limits in the conjunctive synthesis that limits the connections? I mean, granted, it's and, is it something just about the and that process somehow in itself limits the possible connections that these machines can enter into?
Yeah, so I think what it's it may be helpful to think about it in terms of the three syntheses in difference repetition, which I promise I will not go into the detail about it. And no, I'm not about to now go into the detail about it. But the first synthesis is going to be habit, and it's going to be pretty much what Freud talked about as cathexis, as object cathexis, where you have, or binding. So this is going to be something where you've got, okay, two things going on. There's just simply kind of collapsed to form one present moment. So it's a temporal synthesis, but this is what forms the present. But it's doing something with two, or it's already got some pre-existing material that it's binding or contracting together. That's going to be habit. So Deleuze in Difference Repetition, he talks about organisms as contractions of various elements, dirt, water, carbon, oxygen, whatever. So that's something like the first synthesis. You've already got, so so in Anti-Oedipus, I think something like the equivalent would be, you've got this hyle, who knows how to pronounce that? It's the Greek word for usually matter, I think. Like hyla, I don't know, something like that. But you got the
hula or something like that.
Oh yeah, hula. Yeah, let's go with that. I bet people would actually know how to pronounce it, or they're probably hearing that and just like, oh God. So you've got something like that, this impersonal material flows. And then from that, you get these breaks into that form then these connective syntheses. That's gonna, but at the same time, you're not really, you're kind of doing one operation and doing something different, but there's still a whole nother kind of layer of complexity that can be added to those. So the second synthesis is memory, which you don't really need to get into that, but the idea is that habit and memory form this kind of circle that doesn't really do anything. It just repeats the past. But that's why it needs this third synthesis of the future to kind of cut through that and decenter the circle. And I think that's also going to be something like what's going on here, in the sense that, okay, you've got the first synthesis, you have these connections, second synthesis, you got these codes of disjunction, but then you still need this kind of third element to kind of destabilize that and add, well, they all kind of presuppose each other in a way. So yeah, I think that there's always going to be a kind of, the first synthesis, you can see that that's not really adequate. It needs these other two. And in the same way, those other two, each on their own, they presuppose and need all the other syntheses because they happen all at the same time. Yeah, did that make any sense? Guess not.
Look, okay. I wanted to say this. I have okay. I don't know if you adequately answered the question relative to the needs and demands placed on you by others here. You know, in their demand for love and for answering their questions on codes. You know, sorry. But what I wanted to say was I'm interested in this. Well, I appreciate that you separated these, that you're clarifying these separate structures of synthesis that I don't want to say develop because they happen at the same time, but it's sort of like that Schellingian conception of developing almost. It's like Lacan kind of takes it in a funny way where he speaks in, I was talking to Jackson about this earlier, the future anterior, where he said he only speaks in this essay will have eventually proven to be the point where I start, investigating the imaginary. Or like if you ask him, how are you doing? He's like, well, I will have survived by the end of the day, so that's good. That's a positive, I suppose, I'm functioning. I will have functioned properly, whatever. But and that's just this this eternal past thing, this belated presence of the individual. But it's that belatedness, actually, that I'm interested in. This simultaneity of syntheses and our perception of this, not perception, because perception is like, because we're talking about Freud, I want to be careful not to say perception. Our experience, or I don't want to say registration, because Deleu's ghost would haunt me, like Moctezuma, but I would say how we register, how we, whatever. Yeah, I want to read Logic of Sense, but I have and I want to. And I have a question and might point there. How we register this simultaneity and how we interpolate and cognize or establish signifying chains. Well, not signifying chains, but chains of signs regarding it or in response to the recording of that thing. I wanted to make a sort of a conjecture, and Lacan did say that psychoanalysis is a science of conjecture. So, hey, that's pretty good. So I'll hazard one. I think when we're talking about, because this all will come back to the simultaneity of syntheses and the future anterior. But to get there, we're talking about how codes are inscribed on the surface of this body without organs, this recording surface, right? Basically how I interpret that, if I could speak in the most banal and concrete example sort of way, just without any care for my semantics or the propriety of my speech, it'd be like saying, I can do whatever I want with my mouth, all right? And you can't tell me otherwise. And if you do, you're not my dad. I'm gonna get kind of upset. I mean, in fact, because you tell me not to do X, Y, or Z with my mouth, I'm gonna go do it. I can do whatever I please. Okay. However, if I am in charge of writing a textbook on human anatomy for future generations to enjoy, I'm not going to say, yeah, you can do whatever you want with the mouth. In the textbook on human anatomy, I'll say, well, it serves to eat and to drink, and you can, and maybe I would allude, it's a pretty open-ended open end, but and so you can do a lot. It's multifaceted, but it's able to, it's usually used to breathe, or it's one of the multiple options we have to breathe. Yes, sure, yeah, try lighting a candle with your mouth. Wouldn't the code of your mouth disallow the possibility? I think that's an interesting prospect, because I could use my mouth to light a candle if I was a dragon, and I had some sort of igniting fluid in my breath or whatever. But what I think you're pointing to, Nevid, is partiality. Like Eric just said in the chat. I just looked at partial objects being separate from each other in meaningful ways. But my point is, the open-endedness of these indifferent signs. There's these indifferent signs that form what we can call, at least nominally, a chain of indifferent signs. And when I say chain, I don't want to say that I agree with the IPA, the International Psychoanalytic Association. It's a multidimensional one if it is one. But so these indifferent signs that have little to do with the thing that supports those signs or whatever. But when the body without organs that we're discussing operates as it does in the production of recording, it doesn't record everything and anything that happens ever. The body without organs doesn't necessarily record all possible variations of all possible things at all times. The production of recording is its own productive process, very distinctly distinct from other processes of production. So my point is, it's sort of like that. It's like this open-endedness to these indifferent signs. To me, the way it reads is that this open-endedness to these indifferent signs, like my open ends, are, at least in the process of recording, and this is why in the process of recording, the role of the parent, this role of the production of desire or whatever is ascribed. What did he say? It's ascribed to the parent in the process of production. Things are ascribed to parents and Oedipal triangles and so on when we're in this process of production. So my point, and yes, I'd like to talk about partial faceted once I'm done, jabber John, but I think this code kind of falling out into this space of recording. I don't want to say falling out. I'm sorry. I've been reading a lot of Lacan, and he says that a lot. But I think I get that. Like, I buy it. Okay, I'll say that, which is, that's great. I'm excited about that. I can buy this structure of the movement of codes, and I think that the reference to the surplus value of codes in their movement, the effects of the movement of code in machines, following this logic of surplus value, I think is brilliant, and I'm invested. But here's my question. Ultimately, here's my ultimate question, is that in our register, this is what I was bringing up initially, in our registering of this unfolding, or maybe not unfolding, but unfolded and always will have unfolded set of syntheses that we can say operate on or affect through their movement these codes that we're analyzing within the machines in our life, using our analyzing machines. Would these codes, I guess here's my, I'll be forward because I can't figure out how to couch this in neutral language. I've been reading a lot of Lacan, and he talks a lot about signifier and signified. And his big beef with Saussure was that Saussure privileges the signified in order to close language for the sake of producing a structure of scientific investigation to semiotics. Saussure dedicated his life, or a portion of his life, to founding or orienting a project of semiotic science. And in order to do that, he had to reckon with, on one hand, there's a differential aspect of meaning in language, but also that makes it too open, and every meaning of every sign is relative, and it needs to be closed for it to be a consistent, orderly science of semiotics. So I need to close it. And in order to close it, he returns to a privileging of the signified, instead of the signifier. And he describes this like a tree. He has like a tree diagram they made, but Lacan radically rejects this. And makes a lot of guff, puts up a lot of, hubbub about the problem of privileging the signified. And my question is, these machines, the machines can be signs, and the signs can be in different signs of asignifying semiotics, right? That's the term. I still don't know what that means. But if they are, then these signs experience or are affected by the movement of, or in their movement have the effect of codes or coded being, or coded operation, or coded movement, right? Well, is this codedness, this codedness of the machines, this codedness of these sign machines, or these machine signs amidst nature and man? I guess my thing is, I have a hesitation, an apprehension. And it's that it seems like Nevid is pointing out in the chat right now, this code disallowing this infinitude or multiplicity or open-endedness, it seems as though it's a reference to the signified, to what is signified in the code of things, like in Cratylus. In Cratylus, like Aristotle's response to the problem that's presented in Cratylus by Plato. Plato's talking, or Socrates is talking to these guys, and they're like, "Oh, language can mean whatever you want, dude. It's chill, whatever." And then Socrates says, "No, it has to be based on the truth, disconnected from your in an improper language, buffeted by the winds of time and shortening and the swine-like speech of the youth and the poor and the uneducated who destroy syllables and remove us from the perfect language. And yet your language must seek this truth," or whatever, right? And then Aristotle's big problem was like, you can't do that through language. Like you're saying, we need to point to this, that you don't get to the structural issue at hand, which is that the thing that Cratylus and all those dudes you were dismissing were pointing to, and the reason that the sophists still have strength is because you're not grounding language in anything extra linguistic. You're just grounding in this thing inside language. And we need, if we're going to say that there's something like a knowledge or truth outside of the limited language that we use, refer to something, the signified. Spoilers, it's that we need to have a signified. There has to be something signified, something real, not real, but realistic, that is signified. And his response to the sophists was, go walk out a 3-story window. Okay.
Hey, Hunter,
Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to be mean at all, but I
Sure.
don't understand 90% of what you're saying, and you're going a million miles an hour. And I would, I would like to talk about some of these things on a more fundamental level. I think maybe if we could, is that possible?
Yes, I guess all I'm asking is whether code.
I appreciate your energy for this. I really am like blown away, but the problem is in being blown away, I'm feeling unable to participate in the conversation,
Yes.
even as a listener.
Yes. And I guess my over-speaking is usually a rebellion against the feeling of dislocation amongst the discourse of my others. And I try to orient myself through it until somebody, rams like T-bones me so that I can stop on the track somewhere. So I actually appreciate it very much. So honestly, yes, my point is the codes smell of the signified to me. They stink of the signified, of this pre-existent thing which the signifiers refer to. That's all I'm saying. And that's a worry of mine. And I think the only way that I can understand that is if we get deeper into, asignificant or asignifying semiotics. And then further what has been talked about in the chat, which is pointing at these problems that I've been talking about. But that's all.
Yeah,
So, Hunter, I had a question about, it's somewhere in what you said. Then, that's that you saying they stink of the signified, the codes do, and this is coming from a perspective that is sympathetic to Lacan, right? Yeah. Okay. I was thinking the same thing. So, anyway.
Right. I was thinking about, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was thinking about, Chase's talking about genetic codes. If you think about it, like a genetic code, the amino acids do not signify, if you had, I mean, I'm biology stupid, but if you took the human genome, to say that the human genome signifies a human body doesn't seem right to me. That relationship does not seem to be one of signification in the sense that a word, or a sign signifies or points at or points to something. It's a code that represents like a rule for production. And so I'm wondering if maybe, if Chase can correct me here, but if the codes are more something like that, like a rule for how this machine breaks, how this machine interrupts flows. So a code is kind of it can specify what it can produce and what kinds of flows it can interrupt and that kind of thing. But that's not a signifier. That's like a code that defines a kind of production or a kind of interference, a kind of interruption. And that doesn't seem to me the same thing as a signifier. And then you take these codes that in the conjunctive synthesis generate particular kinds of machines, like biological machines and so on. Then you take these codes and you inscribe them on the body without organs without the conjunctive synthesis. And now you have just these like bare, I don't know, like codes for production and synthesis or for production and so on, but they're no longer connected to these flows. And so they can mean damn near anything now that you've extracted them from that world of flows and in those machines and so on. And so now you have these like fragments of DNA or whatever, kind of like floating around on the surface of this thing. And this disjunctive synthesis can just reconnect them in all sorts of bizarre ways. And so because they're no longer embedded in that conjunctive synthesis where they're producing these organs, you can get just crazy wild interconnections, but they're still not signifying anything, I don't think, at least not in this. I mean, I don't understand Lacan, I don't understand Saussure and all those guys, but that doesn't seem to fit the function of signification.
Well, and the decoding is related to deterritorialization, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which becomes really important later, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or in the next volume.
Yeah, or at least in the. So I haven't read the second chapter. I've read part of the second chapter, but I've mainly read the third chapter, and that's when when they'll start talking about the socius, the social body. So the body without organs becomes a kind of societal construct of some type, which doesn't mean it's not real, but that's when so I think the example that Eric had a while ago about just something about the idea of social codes, the way that those operate into society, the way they think of a code in that sense, I think that's very helpful in that is also what they're talking about. So that it operates on that level to a large degree, but also on this level of genetics and DNA and all that. But yeah, I don't, about the signified and the signifiers, to be honest, I kind of, there's something about these words that my mind just doesn't want to, it just doesn't want to learn like the distinctions there, or I'll learn them and then my brain is just like, come on, forget that, come on. And then 5 minutes later, I was just like, signifiers signify blah, 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 And luckily, Deleuze and Guattari, I think they're kind of like that in the sense that they constantly want to try to get past that kind of barrier of being trapped in language. They're constantly trying to pierce through that into this kind of asignifying semiotics, which I don't think I understand that, I think a little bit, but it's still a little hazy. Okay, there's some plateaus and 1,000 plateaus where almost every sentence has the word asignifying in it, and I'm just kind of like, what the hell does that mean? I mean, it's in a way it's asignifying. It's not supposed to mean something exactly. You know, it's kind of it's hard to talk about, obviously, something that's, you know, non-linguistic, is that even the right word? While speaking about it, very difficult. And you know, this is Derrida is very concerned about this. You know, Lacan is concerned about this. A lot of these post-structuralists or structuralists are concerned about this. I think Deleuze and Guattari, they were, while they stress so much this kind of the real and a kind of immediacy of connecting with it, or operating within it, producing within it, it's because they want to get past a lot of that. Well, what they would see as, I'm trying not to trigger Hunter, but they don't like, you know, that mediation of, especially conceptual mediation of everything, or a kind of logical mediation in the kind of straightforward kind of restrictive sense of logic. So that's where, okay, so I'm constantly trying to, you know, use the right terms. Okay, so my so Alistair, my thesis advisor, professor, who knows more about Deleuze than I do, whenever I'm trying to be careful with my words, he tells me to stop, and that it's not Derrida, who cares, say what you want, basically. Which I still, no, I'm still gonna try to be careful about the language I use to describe it, but I think the intent with that kind of shows, I think, something about the intent that Deleuze and Guattari, in a way. So Alistair also said that that he thought this is what pissed Derrida off, which is kind of funny, the idea of just Derrida being pissed off. I don't know, it's kind of funny to me, I don't know. But that, you know, he's like, oh, you can't do this with, you know, the presupposition of binary opposites with this distinction. And I think Deleuze is like, okay, who cares? Let's do something new and interesting instead of this anxiety about being stuck in signifiers and whatever. Is okay. Hopefully I haven't triggered Hunter with that. But I think that's kind of what they're getting at. They're trying to almost, in a way, kind of get past that in order to get into the juicy stuff, which is, you know, intensities, it's corporeal flows of impersonal. There's always, see, that's what their real kind of gripe against the, at least, you know, this kind of naive conception of the Oedipus complex that has to do with, you know, global persons and whatnot. They're always trying to think outside of that kind of global person or the fixed signifier, something like that. Although I wonder if I've, so in a certain way, I think I probably have somewhat misunderstand what Hunter's point was, but so they do talk about, I'm trying to, I hope this is an Anti-Oedipus and not something else, but it's talking about an excess of the sign, I believe. So there's an excess of, or maybe it's the signifier. Oh yes, okay, now I remember. It's in a Logic of Sense where they're talking about, it's a series about structure and Levi-Strauss, and the idea that there's in excess of the signifier, I believe, over the signified. And there's a kind of asymmetry there. And that's what's going to kind of keep these series open. Okay, so logic of sense, there's a lot of stuff that cannot be translated to Anti-Oedipus. I mean, okay, so as an example, Deleuze gives a theory of the Oedipus complex in it and endorses it. He is pro-Oedipus in logic of sense. He uses Freud, Lacan, and Klein and this theory about partial objects and a lot of this psychoanalysis in order to give an idea about how sense is generated. And it's
Can we talk about what partial objects are, and also the word partial faceted that was thrown out in the chat? I don't know if that was in the. I know partial objects were brought up early on, but in the like chapter 1. But I'm not sure I understand what makes them partial objects.
Before we go further with that, I'm just gonna like say I only meant partial faceted in a kind of like facetious way. Because Hunter had said the mouth was multifaceted, and I just took it literally, like, no, the mouth is only a part of the face. The mouth is not many faces. So
I hope that there's some etymological relationship between faces and faceted and facetious as well, so that we can so that even your use of the word facetiously can be connected.
Yeah, I think facet and face are definitely etymologically connected.
I tell people facetious is
No, I was like the face. Yeah, I meant the facetious. I knew the faceted face word, but
Yeah, in 1,000 Plateaus, they have a whole plateau on the face or faciality. But we'll get into that another day, perhaps.
Yeah, but what are these partial objects? Explain these partial objects, and what have we learned about them before? Even that I'm trying to like do a word search back through for partial objects. I'm finding stuff in chapter 1 that I don't see it ever really explained. Was it explained?
I think it is explained. Although
I thought it just introduced them and just talked about partial objects, which in turn produce other flows interrupted by other partial objects. And I don't see where it explains what a partial object is, but maybe I'm just missing it.
Yeah, so the theory, it starts with Melanie Klein, who was a psychoanalyst and it's definitely in the Freudian tradition. So this is kind of taking over from this idea of I can't say this word. Ergogenesis. God, I fail. Ergogenesis. That word. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I don't know. My brain sometimes doesn't want to say a word. Okay, this idea of zones of sensitivity for libidinal concentration. In terms
erogenous?
Erogenous. Thank you. Erogenous.
Oh.
Erogenous. Yes. Okay.
I had no idea what you meant until then.
Yeah. Okay. So you've got your infant psychology, developmental psychology. So the infant is going to kind of key in on certain objects of importance. So that just be usually considered nipple, boob, food, and the mother's face, the mother's voice, the presence of some other thing, a dog. Oh, is that a puppy? Yeah, it is. Of course, it's a puppy. Yeah. Did Nietzsche have a puppy, or did you? No. Okay. Just
No, what's his name again, Eric? I forgot. I'm sorry.
Well, there's Nietzsche. Is the
failure. Nietzsche didn't make it to 2022. But
Yeah, he had.
Oh no.
It's Ophelia.
Ophelia,
Rest
yeah.
in peace. Oh yeah. That actually made me sad, but okay, partial objects, focus chase. All right. Okay, so you've got yeah, these kind of important zones that this infant will kind of key into, and that's going to be seen as that's what these desiring machines make connections with. So the connective syntheses are between partial objects. So that's going to be the partial, the connective synthesis of a desiring machine, which is going to be, you know, a break in a flow. So this is the baby and the mother's nipple drinking that milk. Tastes good.
But what distinguishes, why do we call it a partial object instead of a partial machine? Isn't it just a part of the machine that connects, a connective piece of the machine? And we're calling it a partial object, but why when we could, I mean, it's a part of an object, but what is the full object? The machine? I'm confused.
And so in that
I
illustration
think-
where you've got mouth, breast, and milk, what's a partial object and what's a machine?
I think I've been tempted to say they're the same thing. I think they're using the word partial object because it's a notion or a concept just pulled from Melanie Klein. So my impression was that they were just referencing that and then saying she's kind of misunderstood it, because to her, only to her, is it this just like partial object, as if it's kind of extracted and pulled from something that is like the real organized integrated whole. And I think what they're trying to say is like, you know, she misses the idea that this is just a machine in itself, and there's you know, a body that is formed as a whole, but this is just, you know, another machine on its own as well.
Right. None of these have holes, right? None of these are, there's no whole machine at all, right? That's part of the idea of chapters 5 and 6, right?
Yeah, they're getting at that. They're saying like holes are just, you know, they're
Also, oh, go ahead.
Holes are kind of fictitious things, right?
Look,
Am I-
well, Lacan also said with the partial object thing is that you know, as opposed to Melanie Klein or Freud or whoever talking about it being like like it's like the breast instead of the mother is the partial object. He was saying that it's partial because it is not fully representative of the milk or the getting the milk. It's the function that is the full thing, that it's only a part of. So I don't know if that distinction matters to Deleuze and Guattari, but it's
Can you say that again? Just
like so the full thing is the mother, right, and the partial thing is her breast, for Klein or for Freud or for whatever before Lacan, and Lacan is saying that the full thing, he's saying this to counter what they're talking about, is that it's the process that is the thing that is important to the, I guess
so what is the
structuring of the imaginary, I guess.
what is the brilliance or the whatever it was, what is the significance or the brilliance, or not the significance, it seems like they're really giving credence to Klein at one point and saying what a great, you know, discovery this was, but then she missed it, right? But what's the how is that possible if it's not like there is no whole machine, there is no whole mother. The mother is just part of the machine, is a machine of machines that connects up to another machine, makes them more of a machine, right? Through the infant suckling.
So I think part of the reason why they do like this idea and why they keep the terminology partial object is because it is a part kind of that is selected for and extracted to a certain degree. So a connection, a machine is this kind of way of breaking into, of cutting into a flow, but where exactly it cuts into and the kind of target or so they won't want to talk about intentionality, but I almost see it as something kind of like that a machine connects partial objects. So although at the same time, yes, the partial objects are themselves machines, because on this level, everything is a machine. So, okay, for example, the nipple, okay, you just have to kind of zoom in, you know, kind of change your magnification, and you can see that, oh, there's actually a whole bunch of these machinic connections also going on there themselves with partial objects. So it's partial because it's kind of selecting something out from you know, yeah, there's no holes basically, in the sense that that's not what it's operating with. It's operating with these selective areas that they are trying to kind of break into these flows, but those are going to be different in kind from what we think of as kind of global or whole objects. So they're trying to stress the difference between something like the way that we think of these kind of pre-established whole objects and the way that desire works, which is by this kind of selective attention to just aspects of things. Does that help? Hopefully.
I think the discussion that overall, like especially with some of the sidebar discussion too, is really all of this. I think is helpful. Not to say what you said isn't helpful, Chase, but I think a lot of these different things were helpful together. And Joey said something that I thought was interesting, and I wondered if maybe it could be elaborated on. I don't remember what it even was. Oh, it's just a quote, but I wondered if we could, we only have a few minutes left, right? But it was a quote, a partial object has sufficient charge in and of themselves to blow up all of Oedipus.
Yeah, I guess I was posting that in response because you said, like, why do they like the idea? And I think to them, like, the idea of a partial object points to our ability to experience something like outside of, or being unplugged from its quote unquote whole, from the idea that there's like an integrated whole. And then I posted right after that.
How does that blow up the Oedipal machine? Or how not the Oedipal machine, the Oedipal, what was it? All of Oedipus. How does that blow up Oedipus?
I put this in the chat. I think what they're saying is that causality does not mean logic. Like, we have a tendency to associate causality with logic. And when you look at kind of like the reference theory, or when we tend to look at things where there is some type of causality, we look for a construct or a theoretical construct to fill in the gaps of the mystery, so to speak. But I think what I say Deleuze. How do I say his name right?
Guattari.
But
I think it's actually Guattari.
Guitar, is it?
The gua. It's not. They don't. I don't think you say gua. You don't say gua in French. I don't believe you said get. It's
How do I say
Guattari.
it?
Like a
Like that.
guitar.
Whatever, we know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I mean,
Like a guitar, you'd play a guitar. It's a guitar.
because he says on 38, the nature of these signs within it is insignificant, as these signs have little or nothing to do with what supports them. And then on 46, he says the logic of partial objects is thereby reduced to nothing. So I think what he's saying is that when you take these theoretical constructs and try to apply them to these partial objects where there's really no place for them in their function, you're really just using a blueprint that doesn't apply. It doesn't, I think they're saying we're missing the point when we take these overarching constructs of the Oedipal complex and try to put them into something in precision where it's really the partial object's own logic and function.
Yeah. So I think what he's doing, or Deleuze et Guattari. Okay, sorry, I'll stop. Okay, what they're doing.
I really want to know how to say it right.
What
I'm going to
they're doing.
practice.
Deleuze.
So it's kind of like a little more of a U, like Deleuze. Yeah.
Like Deleuze. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Deleuze, yeah. So I think the logic I think that's right in the sense that what they're challenging is a kind of logic of common sense and ordinary consciousness. And they want to say that that kind of logic has been wrongly applied to the unconscious. So this kind of common sense realm of logic is going to be about, persons. It's going to be about distinct whole objects. This is common sense, And what they're saying is that these things are produced, their effects and the causes, those are going to operate on a different logic. So they're trying to kind of figure out this different kind of schizo logic of the unconscious and show how that is different in kind from common sense logic. And so one of their biggest critiques of Oedipus is that it does exactly that. It takes the common sense logic that deals with persons and whole objects and kind of transplants those down into there's that line where it talks about, Melanie Klein, what she did was she just shrunk Oedipus down to, the molecular level and saturated all of reality with it. So that even on this level, going to, the atoms and the molecules, even those have Oedipus in them. And so the partial object, by disrupting that logic of whole persons, and instead thinking of things as impersonal aspects, a mouth, a nipple, anus, whatever, that is going to be the way to disrupt this way of overcoding things, where it always comes back to persons, mainly the father, the mother, mommy, daddy, me, the Oedipal triangle. So that's I think the kind of distinction that's being made there, and why they think it is a great critique. And so what they fault Klein for, so Deleuze, I think especially, really admired Klein a lot. So logic of sense it's very positive about her theory of partial objects, but the critique is that ultimately the first kind of case in the series of these partial objects are reduced to the interactions between global persons, mainly the child, the infant, with the mother and the father. And so Klein's idea is that it kind of moves on from there, using that same kind of signifying kind of chain of, you got the interaction with the mother that activates, the pleasure principle, the good object versus the bad object, which is going to be what goes away. And that dynamic is ultimately going to be related to the whole person of the mother and the child. And there's kind of this, so the Oedipal complex, the way it's resolved for Klein is that the child is able to connect the partial object of the boob or breast or whatever with the whole person of the mother. And that's going to be some kind of significant step towards, social normality. And that's where they're going to critique this idea and say that, in a way, this is betraying the whole logic of those partial objects.
And Chase,
Yeah.
this I wanted to ask that's what they're talking about in the last paragraph of chapter 1. when they say, insofar as psychoanalysis cloaks insanity in the mantle of a parental complex and regards the patterns of self-punishment resulting from Oedipus as a confession of guilt, its theories are not at all radical or innovative. On the contrary, it is completing the task begun by 19th century psychology, namely to develop a moralized familial discourse of mental pathology, which, I mean, to me, the way that I'm reading this, and obviously there's more than one way to read it, is that I don't think that what they are saying, I don't think that it debunks the Oedipal drama as something that exists. It's more, to me, is some sort of critique of the way that it is used to like reinforce, normative bourgeois values as patterns of behavior, right? Like, so it's
Yeah.
not a critique of the Oedipus complex as it's not saying that it's bullshit. It's saying that,
Well, their invocation of Foucault there is really a kind of a invocation of the whole genealogy of these ideas, right? That there's a the power, that they're there as a way to
right, that,
There's
yeah,
a kind of historicist kind of critique of it,
yeah,
or genealogical critique of it.
I think genealogical more than historicist, right?
right. I'm reading it as a Foucauldian critique. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It's not
Yeah.
a critique of
I mean,
like,
they invoke him specifically by name, right?
Yeah, Nathan, I think you're right. So they don't say that there's no such thing as the Oedipus complex, but their big critique is that it's universal and that it extends to everything in this kind of improperly or illegitimately transcendental way of thinking. Instead, they're going to say that, no, this is an effect of a certain mode of social production, mainly capitalism, and that it's connected with, these bourgeois kind of moral codes and whatnot. And that's what causes the Oedipus complex. So what's going on here is that they've properly said that this one kind of contingent effect of one certain mode of social production that produces the Oedipus complex, but that this is then kind of turned around and said, oh, it's completely universal and natural. Not that I wouldn't say maybe Freud kind of goes that far, but I think it's similar to the critique you could say of well, actually, oh, never mind. I don't want to bring that up. Okay, so they're going to talk about universal history. I think starting in the second chapter, and that I know will confuse people. Is like, what the hell, universal history? So it's a spin off of some Marxist ideas, but the idea is okay. It's a critique of this idea of where capitalism sees itself kind of as the end of history, as this kind of final, inevitable kind of culmination of everything. That instead needs to be understood in terms of contingent results instead of some kind of inevitable universal logic, which is confusing about why they talk about universal history, but we'll get there. But it's similar to that in the fact that they're arguing, no, Oedipus isn't eternal. It's not, biologically ingrained on some, profound, deep level necessarily. Instead, it's going to be something that comes after. So yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting, something that was said earlier, and it might have been, was it by Joey, who's left, right? I think it might have been about causality, that I thought was interesting, because I made some notes about causality. I made them back around, where did I make them? On beginning of chapter 5, I made notes about causation, cause and effect. It seemed to be adopting a very cause and effect kind of a kind of a yeah, words are losing me or leaving me. Too much wine for the words, right? But when they say, but it is such only in relation to a third machine that ideally, that is to say, relatively produces a continuous infinite flux. For example, the anus machine and the intestine machine, and the stomach machine. These seem to be implying a cause and effect relationship in the connections of the machines. And I think somewhat bothered me because I'm not a big cause and effect fan, I guess. Maybe seems very anti. Maybe Nevitt could give some thoughts there on. I think it seems very anti dependent arising to have these direct cause and effect concepts in a linear cause and effect become problematic.
Yeah, that's kind of, it's pretty complex because so they do have a kind of notion of causality operating, but it's definitely not a kind of straightforward thing where it's almost, there's different types of causality to a certain extent between different things on, okay, so talk about it on different levels, you know, that's kind of, it's my Derridian kind of anxiety about language levels, you know, is okay. Anyways, so the way that events will influence each other on the same level will be different from how they'll influence events on other levels. And so any kind of that there's kind of just one type of causality, you know, a kind of efficient causality or material causality or something like that, they definitely will want to question that. And so, okay, in Deleuze's book on Spinoza, you could tell he's not really totally down with the big emphasis that Spinoza puts on causality, although he somewhat likes it as a way of, he likes the distinction between effects and causes, but he doesn't necessarily like the idea of that what is operating on a kind of fundamental level is efficient causation. And he says that these relations of expression that Spinoza talks about are not completely causal, that there's a lot of non-causal relations going on. And he says that Leibniz is an innovator in this, that Leibniz was the master apparently of non-causal relations of expression, which I'm not going to go into exactly what expression means in this sense, but maybe we can talk about that later. But so yeah, oh yeah, and so his first book is on Hume, who of course is the great, you know, skeptic of causality. So yeah, okay, and then the last thread to that is going to be that there's a notion of quasi-causality in logic of sense, which is the idea that, okay, you've got these bodies, states of affairs that the Stoics thought that's everything that exists is a body. These are all causes. They produce effects that are events, but those events can never be the cause of something in the same way that a body is the cause of something. So but yet these effects, these events, they at the same time have some kind of also an effect on bodies and other events. So they're going to talk about these as quasi-causality, which is a complex notion, but it's going on in Anti-Oedipus too, because there's somewhat of the same kind of structure. I think they even use the term quasi-causality in here, but anyways, that's a long way of saying that, yeah, they're definitely trying to complicate the notion of causality, and actually like literally complicate it in the sense of trying to think of it in terms of folding together these different types of causality, unfolding them. They're thinking of causality definitely on a different level than the way that you'd, I don't know, imagining just like a Richard Dawkins or somebody saying there's like one type of causality. It's like brute, efficient causality of matter, energy, and if it doesn't do that, then it's not real. Something like that. That's gonna be the kind of thing that they would question that, basically. Yeah.
I think that's, I didn't understand. I don't think I understood half of what you said, I'm afraid. And I need to probably discuss it with you further offline, this different versions of causality. I do think that their layout of these machines was very linear, and yet they must acknowledge that these machines have a bidirectional relationship that's causal, even. Like, I mean, basic evolutionary ideas. We know the breasts don't exist because of something upstream, right? They exist. There's a breast. There's a causation that goes the other way, right? There's breasts existing in part because of the baby is going to nurse from them, but the nursing is going. They make it look like a one-way direction though in their in chapter 5, and I guess it just bothered me there. And maybe you addressed it, but I just couldn't register it. Can I ask a question though on, you said something about, I know we're over time now too, but you said something, I'm in the wrong chapter now. There was an idea that I saw here that you said something about that related to it, and I'm hoping I can find it now. I probably cannot. I probably didn't underline it. I underlined so many things, and yet I didn't underline that, right?
So I don't.
If I
I'm not
think of it,
sure
if I think of it, I'll put it in the chat. I guess.
Okay.
I guess I'll put it in the post on the. Are we still using that? We still have the.
Yeah.
The,
Yeah, we
the
still
place
got
on
that
the.
on Discord. Yeah.
There was something that you said just a moment ago that I was going to try and catch it and say it wasn't exactly what I was thinking of, but it was related to something I had a question about that I didn't understand about the. It wasn't specific to causality. I also wanted to note, I did make a note here. I mean, I guess like at the beginning of in the 1960s, 1970s, I guess Freud was a lot more popular, right? And psychoanalysis was a lot more of a big thing. And I made a note at the end of the chapter, at the end of the section here, the whole end of the part 1, wondering about because this seems to be a whole genealogy of psychoanalysis, and wondering how this relates to the genealogy of 21st century psychology and mental health counseling, and to power structures around those, because those seem to have intentionally diverged from psychoanalysis. But I wonder really how those fit into those power structures that Foucault would identify, that they're not addressing here directly because they're so focused on Freud and Lacan.
So they do critique, I think when you consider the psychiatric institutions as well. So I think it does go past just psychoanalysis, and a lot of it can be extended to, I mean, really what they're going to do is so they're going to show that psychoanalysis, what that is doing, is kind of the work of capitalism, to kind of put it in a crude way. But so they're not just extending their critique only to psychoanalysis, but they're going to say that psychoanalysis is itself a kind of expression of something else, and that we can see that within basically all of social repression and psychic repression. So they're going to definitely extend it beyond that.
They're going to talk beyond that in future sections. They haven't. You're not saying they've said that already, right? You're saying they're going to do that in the future.
Correct.
Yeah, because I'm really interested.
So the second chapter, though, is going to be hardcore, going into detail about psychoanalysis. So get ready.
Okay.
Oh,
okay.
And also, this book. Okay, for the people that are just reading this book and just straight nothing else, just Anti-Oedipus, I strongly recommend just reading something about Freud, something about Lacan, so you know what's going on. Because otherwise, I could only imagine the confusion. I mean, Freud is really easy to understand. He's a very simple writer. I read The Ego and the Id. Was that yesterday? Yeah. It was very easy, very simple to understand. So I definitely recommend reading just like a little bit of Freud if you're not familiar. Is that
Beyond the Pleasure Principle would be a good one too.
Yeah.
Especially for Lacan stuff.
Yeah, and so Deleuze uses a lot from Beyond the Pleasure Principle. So yeah, that's a good recommendation. Yeah.
Hey Chase.
A couple things I'd like to. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm just gonna be quick. It's me, your friend Chase. Would it be possible to create a third like mini seminar, because you're not advertising, suggesting that we do this secondhand reading? So I'm wondering if it's possible through Discord we can set up the additional auxiliary book. Obviously schedules are weird, but maybe we can talk about that idea on the Discord if that's pleasing to you. Yeah.
If you please.
If you please.
Yeah, I'm open to that. Definitely. Seriously, I think this book you need some kind of supplemental resources of but then that's hard to coordinate, not only with the meetings, but what readings to read. So yeah, I think let's talk about it on Discord, because I think that's a good idea.
And a couple things I was about to say I'd really like to talk about on Discord. I really wish we could follow up on Discord, but I really wish we had talked about the puzzle and the pieces being forced together. I thought that was a really interesting, aesthetically very interesting concept of forcing those puzzle pieces together, and even puzzle pieces that aren't part of the puzzle, as well as, for reasons that you and I have talked about separately, Chase, the spatially localized and non-spatially localized concepts on page 40. We didn't get a chance to get into those, and then I'll try and find that other thing that you trigger for a second, and then I lost it in the haze of the wine, I guess. That I'll try and find that so we can discuss it further on the Discord. I haven't been active on the Discord, but I will try to jump in there and throw some stuff in, because I had a lot of thoughts here that I would like us to talk about. But 2 hours goes by so fast. Actually, it seems like a long time, but then it doesn't.
It's a very, very dense reading, so there's just tons of stuff in there.
Yeah, though I did find chapter 6 really quite easy read, other than I didn't understand the partial objects, but I thought it was a quick read. I read it very fast compared to the others. The others like bogged me down. I felt like I was missing a dose of acid.
Was the 6? That was the.
I needed a tab.
Read,
I needed
right?
a tab or two before. Yeah, 6 was easy. 6, I thought I could. I mean, I felt.
You mentioned acid. Did I just
Yeah, I
hallucinate
said
that?
I felt like on the 5 chapters before that I was missing a tab or two. That I needed
Oh,
to drop. That I
tab, I
needed to
see.
drop.
Yeah.
That I was not understanding for some reason that was like way out there. But chapter 6 seemed like an easy read. That's all I'm saying.
You know,
So
when we read Phenomenology of Perception by Merleau-Ponty, he would talk about using, what was it that he was using? What drug was it?
Oh, mescaline.
Mescaline. So
oh
we thought
really?
maybe we would understand Merleau-Ponty better if we use mescaline. So maybe we'd
Oh
understand
no.
Deleuze and Guattari better if we dropped
Yeah,
a few
well,
tabs.
So also his
That's
anonymous
disappointing because I'm
source-
trying to read a lot of Merleau-Ponty, and maybe that's what I'm missing. I didn't know that.
We should talk about that in the
Unfortunately,
Discord.
unfortunately, I have a day job that would not appreciate it much if I did that, and they test for it.
You know, I could probably go into a philosophy class, tripped out on something, and the students be just like, wow, this is really interesting. This is really profound. And I would not have any idea what I was saying, and I just recorded that. Oh, well.
Well, and I mentioned Dennis Hopper once before, saying that one particular participant was, I was really thinking about a particular scene in Apocalypse Now where Dennis Hopper talks about, what are you going to land on? 3/4, 5/8, right? and Dennis Hopper has said in interviews since that he was, I don't know if he was tripping, when he was I don't know what he was on at that time, if he was just smoking pot or if he was using something a lot more significant, but he is definitely admitted to not being sober during that scene. In fact, he had no idea what his lines were. Those were completely made up.
We
and
thought
they're
about
great lines.
asking the philosophy department to provide us mescaline, but we decided that was probably a bad thing to ask for.
You need a
Research.
cross-departmental research program with the religious studies.
Yeah. See you
That'll
on
be our
Discord?
next field trip.
Yeah.
Yeah. First we had Crimes of the Future. Next, well, what we're gonna do? We're gonna do the isolation tank thing.
Float tanks.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I want to do that. For some reason, that sounds not fun.
I did that a couple times and mostly I just fell asleep. So I don't know.
What are
That
those?
sounds kind of fun.
They have these float tanks that are they're water that are highly saturated in some kind of salt. And so you go in this tank and you float because it's so salty, and then they turn off all the lights. And so it's not exactly sensory deprivation, but it's like sensory deprivation light, because you're floating and you don't have any visual input or whatever.
Is that what they're using for the treatment of serious PTSD? There's a PTSD treatment program where they do something like that, I think.
Maybe.
No, there's just places in Austin, probably in San Marcos, where you can just, you pay so much and they stick you in one of these tanks for, actually, in the one in Austin, they put you in this massage chair for like 15 minutes and get you all loosened up. And then you go into this tank and you just float there for a while.
So, I just remembered something that is relevant that this is probably the only time that it's relevant enough and I would mention it, is that, okay, so the idea of body thought organs, it comes from Artaud. Artaud got this idea while I believe he was tripping on mescaline in the deserts of Mexico. When he had some kind of vision and got this idea of the body thought organs. So I've read the source that Deleuze gave in Logic of Sense, and I couldn't really find what he was even talking about.
So I know a little bit about Artaud. He's like, the body without organs is a good thing to Artaud, like unequivocally good, and it's this idea that like science breaks things down into organs, into cells, and all this. And he's saying like no, because Artaud, he was against doctors, he was against psychoanalysis for sure, he was against science. He liked magic and drugs and insanity. That's what Artaud liked. So he was a poet, right? And
Sounds like my kind of guy. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. And so the body without organs is like this, like it's like a tree, right? Like it's like it's this like the body without organs is the human as like as conceived of like a whole, like its own thing. It's not something you can break down. It isn't. It's not a system of things. It is a thing. It's a whole thing. It's just this like, I don't know. In my mind, when I hear him talking about it, I think of like a some sort of like glowing orb, or like when Yoda says, "Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter." So and based on what I can gather from Anti-Oedipus, this is not what these guys are talking about at all. But that's the thing with Artaud, is that anytime, or even Bataille for that matter, right? Like when those guys are brought up, to me, like the conversation immediately takes a left turn, like because we are out of the realm of critical theory, completely out of the realm of philosophy, and we're into the realm of like just totally nuts. Which I think that they have an affinity for it, and they're trying to maybe bottle it and relate it to Marx and all that kind of thing. So, but hey, I don't know. I'm only 50 pages in.
I think they definitely want to take an element of that. Yeah.
Well, I think Deleuze cautioned against drug use, actually, which I don't think most Deleuzians have really followed through on, which is kind of funny because, Foucault was paid in weed to debate Chomsky. So, can't say all the French philosophers are the same.
Yeah, it's so Deleuze, he stressed that his personal life was pretty boring. He mainly just kind of stayed at home, had a wife and kids, and basically was a scholar. He was a nerd who read philosophy books and probably spent most nights reading Spinoza rather than doing what Foucault was probably doing, which I think that's probably exaggerated too somewhat, but yeah. But
what was Foucault doing?
Drugs.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tripping balls.
Maybe turn off the maybe time to turn off the recording.
I don't.
Yeah, maybe just
so
maybe just trim like the last like